Alright folks, back on it. This video number 2. I've already, as you can see, taken some stuff off. Just the fairings and, side covers and so forth. And the fuel tank. So this is what we got. And there was all that mess of LED lighting that they put in there that I got out of the way. It's in the garbage can, so that's good. It was a mess. That was the only mess though. This thing has not been butchered significantly. Now what I did notice is this is clearly an aftermarket and a repaired regular rectifier. That's what this is. You can see that they soldered direct. That's not bad necessarily unless the solder joints are bad. My Magna's the same way. Some of these Hondas are notorious for just melting these plugs. I've tried putting plugs back in mine to make it more original, and I use good quality, vintage Japanese motorcycle style aftermarket connectors, and they still melt. So this is not bad. It looks like shit, so it'll get cleaned up, of course, but I didn't test the charging system. It's not really relevant at this point. The stator, of course, would be back behind here, and the rotor as well. I think, if it follows suit, yeah, here it is. There's your wire that comes down from your regular rectifier. There's the 3 yellows, which is your 3-phase alternator, really. Well, this isn't really alternator. This is a stator. So anyway, it's an alternator once it goes through here, but not here because this is AC coming up to there. So we'll deal with that another time. We can do off the bike checks of this system. We'd have to cut that, wire the 3 wires to do it, but I have a whole video on that if you want to look at it as far as charging systems on motorcycles, ATVs, and other power sports go. So I'm not going to get into that here. But, I'm really pleasantly, not surprised, I'm just pleasantly pleased, I guess that'd be the way to put it, that this is not butchered up. The wiring's intact. I see evidence that fasteners are original. There's a couple of changes out, like on some screws that hold the bodywork in place. It's not unusual. Let's see, the reserve tank has, coolant in it. It has a relatively new oil filter. So this thing has been maintained, it looks like. And again, not butchered. This is I'm not sure if this may be, yeah. This is an original or an OEM fuel pump. I'm really surprised this thing still works. Because it's got the wire, that's definitely Honda. Got the right colors, and it goes right up to into the factory system. So, wiring harness. So, yeah, that's interesting. So there's your fuel filter. It comes down from the tank. Speaking of the tank, it's over here. The fuel cock is bypassing just a little bit, and what you do to test that, of course, is disconnect it from, a hose from it, and if it starts dripping out, then the fuel cock needs to be rebuilt. That's a bad thing on many bikes, but not necessarily on this one because it does have a fuel pump in the way. So it's not going to fill up the carbs with gasoline and potentially overflow into a open intake valve and into the engine very easily, at least. And plus it's all uphill, so it's probably not going to happen at all. So I'm not going to worry about it, and the way it ran, I don't suspect that anyway. But just food for thought. If you have one where you have a tank sits up higher and gravity feeds down into your carbs, you don't ever want to see that. That's bad. Something that needs to be checked regularly in these old bikes. Down inside here, which is between the 2 banks of cylinders, it looks very suspiciously the same as my V45. Of course, this is pretty much the same bore and stroke, but the rest of it's somewhat different. Bottom of the carbs, yada yada. It's set up like the Magna as well, where we have a air box is the rack that holds the carbs together instead of a rack like on a across the frame inline 4. And again, I'm really familiar with these, so this is not a problem at all. Getting them off, putting them back on, like I said, I'm really familiar with them. So it's not going to be an issue. Let's take a look at this side. Again, factory fasteners. This hasn't been messed with. I like to look and see that. Same with on this coil. The wiring up here in the front, these are often really butchered. These are not. This is all factory, all OEM. This is suspiciously looking a little bit snotty with some green pus maybe coming out in one of these. So all that will get addressed at the appropriate time. Clean these connectors, but they are definitely OEM, not messed with. That's always good to see. Compared to, again, that ZX10 I mentioned in the intro video, was completely butchered. Wiring, oh my God, this is a pleasant situation that I find myself in. I'm very happy about that. So let's see. This is what the order of operations are going to be, probably in this video as well, at least some of it, and subsequent videos. I'm going to pull the carbs off, drain the coolant, and remove the radiator. Put the battery back in. I have it sitting over on the shelf, just get it out of the way, and it's safer that way. And then pull the spark plugs, and we'll do a compression test. Based on the results of the compression test, regardless of the results actually, we'll Borescope down each cylinder. I can get at these right now, but the two front ones, the radiator's in the way. So we'll get that out, like I said. We're also going to look inside the actual intakes because we can see the intake valves. Maybe, I don't know how many we can see, probably both of them. And then we are going to make additional determinations as to what other operations need to be done. If everything checks out good in those tests, and we would definitely be focusing on the engine coming out and of course flipping it over and taking it apart to the point where we can get the case split and change out or repair the transmission. I did take this for a ride. I said in the original video I didn't. Well, I hadn't at that point. But when I backed it out to wash it, I said, you know what, let me take it for a quick spin. And I find that this doesn't have third or fourth. So there's definitely something big time going on. But it goes into first and second, no problem. No hang-ups, no nothing. Which leads me to believe that we're looking at most definitely bent shifter forks and probably damaged gear cogs, but I'd lay better money on bent shifter forks as the main problem because it seems to want to go in. You hear it kind of a little bit when it tries to go in like third, nothing in fourth. So I would say bent shifter forks for sure. And then secondarily, the gear cogs where they mesh, not the gears meshing themselves necessarily, but the two gears when they slide on either the primary or the countershaft, they will, they may not be jiving with each other, I guess would be the best word. This bike also has a, I don't know why, I haven't read up on it, has a camshaft positioning sensor, which is up in here. Not sure why they monitor that. Maybe that's where they pick up impulse for the tach. That could be. I don't know. On the Magna, for example, that impulse is picked up off of one of the two spark boxes, they call them, which in mine are electronic, but they still serve the same function. So I don't know. Like I said, everything looks like it should. So I'm really happy about that because you really never know until you look up her skirt whether or not somebody's been in there screwing around. Luckily, this doesn't seem to be the case on this one. Alrighty then, got the radiator out. If you're interested, you're going to do something like this. The drain on these Magnas and this VFR and so forth on the water pumps, same as it is on a lot of motorcycles. So you take out a little drain plug. We'll have a sealing washer which is either there or stuck somewhere. I don't know. We'll replace that, but that'll be on that drain plug. They're almost always 8mm or 10mm headed fasteners, a little bolt, M6 thread usually. So we'll get a new sealing washer on that. Okay, so the next step I'm going to do, blow off all this, of course, and then we need to take off the air box, any hoses and the fuel lines and so forth. Well, actually, they can probably stay. I don't know what I'm going to do with them. No, that's hooked up over here. We'll take them off here. Air box, carburetors, get them out of the way, and then we're going to set up for a compression test. Carbs are out. Now, I wanted to go over a couple things on this particular bike and regarding the removal of these carbs. The service manual says to take the cover off, which goes on the top of the carbs. This is the carbs with that cover off. So I'm talking about the plastic part that sits atop here, where the air filter goes. This is the box. There's the holes. And two of them were frozen and had to be drilled out. That can be a little bit nerve-wracking, but let me show you one of the fasteners first. This is one that ultimately came out, but it's a shoulder bolt, as you can see. that you have some meat there that goes through, that penetrates through the box. So this is designed essentially to go down only so far, put a certain amount of preload on the plastic where it meets that aluminum so you don't crush it. That's why you have a shoulder on those, okay? Knowing that, it's pretty simple to deduce. That way we can do is we can drill the heads off of them, focus, and then just pull it off the shaft. I'm trying to use that in the video. And so that's what I did. I took a left-handed drill bit, put a fresh grind on it, and very slowly went to town. As it developed chips, I took a magnet and took them out so there wouldn't be any chance of even going through this, screen here. And everything's fine. Now I just took a glance in these cylinders, in these intakes rather. We're going to look into them a little bit more here in a minute. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Not bad at all down in there. We're going to shove it. Borescope down, really take a close look at the intake valve. We can see where the other intake valve is and try to take a look at that where the seat is. Just, for shits and giggles. Okay, so as far as getting these carbs out on a V4, you'll read a whole bunch of different ways to put them in, which has to do with putting straps on one side and kind of rocking them in. That works. As far as getting them back in, though, the easiest way is to replace these carb holders, which I'm going to do. Okay, these are harder than Peter North on a good night. I think I used that one before. So we're going to replace these carb holders. I did look, and they are available OEM, so I will definitely do that. And to get them out, you got to pry them. There's really no other way to do it. So you take a pry bar, and what I do is, I guess I should have filmed this, but I didn't. What I do is I take and start to work on one of them and get it to move a little bit. Of course, the band clamps are well loose. You got to really loosen these up a lot because, as these things kind of angle, it spreads it even more. And then hit it with some silicone spray and just rock that one, rock the next one, go around. All of a sudden you see them start to want to go, and then pop, they'll come up. These are actually not really called boots. That's the improper nomenclature. They're called insulators. Honda calls them carb insulators, but they're carb holders, carb boots, whatever you want to call them. Boots are really on the backside, so I guess carb insulators, carb holders are better. So yeah, these are absolutely trashed. No sense in using those again. Let's go ahead and get the spark plugs out, and we'll set up the comp tester, and we'll run a comp test on it. I got to put the battery back in. Doy. And then I think that's important data we got to gather. No matter what anybody else says, the compression test on an unknown engine is really paramount. Now, another thing I want to show you was, I mentioned before there really wasn't any signs of anybody going into this like fasteners with chewed up heads, other witness marks like that. There is, of course, on those screws that went down in that lid, or that cover rather. There also is on this nut, which is an inspection cap. Go inside there, and I'm pretty sure that's where you'd pick up for the timing to do a valve clearance check. Now that's a good sign, because that means somebody has been in here at one time or another manually barring this motor over and probably doing a valve clearance check. So if somebody's been in the heads or head covers, which again is not a bad thing. That means maintenance has probably been done. The radiator looks spotless too. There ain't nothing wrong with that. That's in nice shape. The inside of this gas tank is phenom. Awesome. The last 4, maybe even more bikes that I've worked on have had completely decimated fuel tanks on the inside. So you know what? I'm getting pretty sick of doing a phosphoric acid bath and getting all wet, and I'm getting kind of sick of it. So I'm really glad to see that. So far, again, so far so good. There's our spark plugs. When I take these plugs out on an unknown motor, I label them because I want to know what cylinder a plug goes to if there's a problem. They all look about the same. Not perfect. Well, let's try getting in the shot. Not bad. Maybe a little indication of running rich. That's not really oil, it looks like to me. It's more rich because there's a little bit of gas on them. Either way, we're going to have to scope it. So let's do a comp test, as I said first, and then we'll scope it. We're going to go off the lapel mic for this because, again, it sounds really almost sounds sick. It just doesn't filter the noise of engines cranking or anything. You won't even know when the thing's cranking. It sounds more like it's underwater. So, all right. So let me tell you one other thing here. If you're going to do a compression test on an unknown engine, in this case, obviously it's known it was running, but an unknown engine, what I would normally do is I would normally, if it's been sitting a long time, like that circus bike was, 25 years reportedly, I'd get some fogging oil down the cylinders, and that bike I jacked it up and spun the rear wheel and got it turning the engine a little bit to spread some of that oil around even before I cranked it with by the starter. This engine, we don't have to worry about any of that stuff because, of course, it's a known subject. It was running. So right now the cylinders essentially are in a situation where they'd be as lubricated as they normally would if this bike was being ridden daily, which it was. So we're not going to add any oil, we're not going to do anything else, but we're going to make sure that we don't leave any of our stuff in anywhere, doesn't get sucked in. And by the way, on a bike that's got a fuel pump, the first time you get squirted in the face with residual fuel because over here your fuel line is off, you'll remember to do it next time. All right, number one. Wow, that's good. Look at that. Let's get it up a little better. 165 almost, about one, well, maybe close to 170, 168 or so. Number one. That's good. Wow, I'm really happy to see that. So yeah, that's excellent. We're going to go ahead and go down to number two here. Remember the way this is set up on a V4, a Honda V4 at least, is 1, 3, 2, 4. We're going to do number two since we're on this side anyway, because again it's 1, 3, 2, 4. So we'll go right over here. Number two. All right. We got a problem then. Got 120 out of number two. That is way too much of a variance. Generally speaking, it's about 10% allowed between cylinders. So right now, there's possibly a problem. It could simply be valve clearance. That's all it is. But there definitely could be a problem on number two as far as the cylinder goes. So let's say 165 on number one and 120 on number two. We take the high number and we multiply that times 10%, which would be about 16 psi. So this thing would only be allowed to be about maybe in the high 140s, 145 maybe, you know. And so we're at 120, we're no good. So we're going to have to look into that one. Let's see what the other two show. Here's number three. All right, so 150, this one's good. So you've got two good and one not so good. Last but not least, number four. Oh, yeah. So let's see, what was that then? 1, 3, and 4 are excellent, but number 2 is an outlier. Gotta figure that one out. Figure out why. It could be valve clearance, but my gut feeling is it's not, to be honest with you, because I would expect valve clearance to be an issue on all of them, but it's possible that one could be out that far. Let's go back and recheck number 2 again, just to make sure. There, we did it right. I did check to make sure my business end, my dangly bits were inside properly, so, and tightened down, but it didn't seem to make any difference. I kind of did try it again, but let's go back over there. I'm going to go ahead and do the Borescope. I'll do that off camera. Here's cylinder 1 intake valve, at least one of them. I can't really see the other one. A little crusty, but not bad. Shot of cylinder number 1 itself. You can see a little vertical scoring, but not terrible. Another view of the same cylinder, number 1. Discoloration on the cylinder walls is actually a reflection from the top of the piston. I know it looks like rust, but it is definitely not rust. It's just a little reflection off the top of the piston. I guess I forgot to take a picture of cylinder number 2's intake valve. All these shots here are the cylinder number 2 cylinder walls. Doesn't look terrible at all. Like I said, a little vertical scoring like you typically see in these. My Magnus probably no worse, no better. So yeah, number 2 is not really telltale as far as what's going on with that compression. Here's cylinder number 3. Obviously the reflection kind of skews the look of the piston. Piston looks like it has a flat spot. It certainly does not. So it's just the way it looks because of the reflection.
the camera doesn't have the best accuracy as far as reproducing what it really is. But again, not terrible. You can see the reflection on the shiny cylinder walls of the top of the piston. There's number 4, same deal. You can see some vertical marks, but remember, compression in 1, 3, and 4 were excellent. So I'm not really seeing anything that jumps out at me in any of these Borescope shots of the cylinders.
At this point, what I'm going to do is, I already got the cover off to bar the motor over manually. I'm going to go ahead and pull the front head cover off. This would be for 2 and 4. And we'll do a valve clearance check on number 2. It's really easy to do in this condition because everything's off. Because that's really going to determine a bidirectional process, if you will, instead of a singular, where I was just going to deal with the tranny. If I can bring that compression up because it's a valve clearance issue, but we'll kind of go over the data in one, clip here and show you what I got. But that's going to really determine where I need to go, because I'll just tell you, as far as preliminarily goes, there's some vertical scoring and vertical lines in the cylinders on all 4 of them, including the ones that are really high, but it's nothing, to write home to mom about. I mean, if I did my Magna right now, it'd probably be worse. So with 3 of them that are excellent and 1 that is poor, and the spark plugs look all the same, and with no other things jumping out at me, I'm going to go for a valve clearance check. All right, so we're going to check it right where they say to check it. Now I can get 5 in there, but it's okay. But this side, I can't get 5 in at all. That's really tight. All right, now let's check the exhaust side. 7. All right, we got 7. Ooh, that's really loose. Yeah, so that's super loose on this one. Loose as a goose. We know we're a TDC on this one, so we're right at the top of that center. The intake valve opened and closed. We looked at the timing mark, and the timing mark's up on where it says for 2. Actually, for 2, and it'll be 2 and 4, I think. But anyway, we're going to be good on that. I'm going to double check that just to make sure that I'm not screwing this up, because the first time I did it on this bike. Wow, 8 goes straight in. Is that what it's supposed to be? Yeah, 7 thousandths on the exhaust. I'm not even going to bother checking it anymore. If it's super loose with an 8, we obviously have to adjust it. And we have, we're too tight on the intake side on at least one of them. Yeah, since they're separate, it's pretty easy to figure this out. I mean, just break the stem loose and the lock nut and adjust it. Yeah, that's too tight. So it would be how I denote these if I take them apart, or I'm doing a documentation of the valve clearances when you have 2 valves, or 4 valves per cylinder. I'll do like number 2 intake left, number 2 intake right. You can't really see me, but number 2 intake left and number 2 intake right, and exhaust the same thing. So that's how I'm going to refer to it here. So number 2 intake right is good. I'm not going to check all of them. I probably will check. I mean, I'm not going to check all 4, but you know why this cover's off? Just because let's see, what is that? Number 4 over there was so high, as well as the other 2 on the rear bank, 1 and 3. I'm going to bar this over off camera and just check those really quick to see if they're in clearance, because maybe they're all out. I'm just speculating. I'm just operating with a speculum. I'm kind of like a gynecologist here. Motorcycle gyno. So, okay, let me get these adjusted off camera. They're pretty simple to do. We just have to break loose the nut, the stem nut. Luckily, you just take a regular slot in instead of some funky tool, and retorque them back up and check it again. All right, we're going to try her again in number 2. So this is where we're at. The valves are all set on number 2, and I barred it over to number 4, and I checked those. Number 4's intakes were perfect. Number 4's exhausts were, closer to 7 than these were, but still a skosh loose. I don't believe I could get 8 into those. I didn't actually try it. It's not really important, because the important thing right now is what number 2's compression is. I'm going to tell you right now, my gut feeling is that this is not going to make much, if any, difference. They just weren't that far off. So we can just try it like now. It doesn't matter that the head cover's off. You just got to make sure nothing's going to get snagged in them gears, or if you have a timing chain, that chain. So let's see where we're going to be at on this. Like I said, I'm not totally convinced here, but well, okay. I guess I was wrong. That is a lot better. Huh. 155 or so? I'd say almost 160. Yeah. So what do we have? Yes, it's flirting with 160, 159 maybe. Of course, this isn't graduated to that level, but yeah, that's actually not bad. We went from 120 up to almost 160. I didn't think it was going to make a difference at all, if any. You know, I figured if it was like 10 or 12 psi or 15 psi off, that would make a difference. But yeah, pretty significant. So that's a really good illustration of just how important valve clearances are to these engines, especially these V4s, and really any of these, and even across the frame 4 is the same thing, because you know it's really, really critical. I'm pumping oil all over my new impact wrench. Yikes. Impact gun, rather. Well, that's not good. Let me wipe that off. Yeah, okay, that's all right. I got a warranty on it anyway. So, yeah, again, where was I? I'm talking about valve clearances. They are super critical, as you can see, to these engines. So you got to make sure yours are good if you're going to do proper tuning. In fact, you don't even want to bring a manometer or any type of a synchronization device near these things until you do a valve clearance check on these bikes. Whether it's a flat tappet shim over or under bucket motor or one of these stem and screw jobs, you definitely have to do a valve clearance. So yeah, okay. So we're gonna go. What was I gonna do after this? I guess we're gonna have to close this out. It's getting pretty long already, but let me think about that, because I think I wanted to summarize something, and then we'll button this up. All right, so let's do a quick summary. We'll button it up. I have no idea how long this is going to be until I get into editing. I'll try to keep it as short as possible. I mean the entire video. All right, so the objective here, of course, was to do a compression test to check the overall health of the top end, valves, pistons, cylinders, rings. It's a good indication, at least. And then, figure out where we're going to go from there. So what do we find? We find 3 of the 4 cylinders with bitchin' compression, and then 1 with not so bitchin'. So you got to look at some other things to determine whether or not you're going to have to do a top end job or what the cause may be. Now, my first inclination on this was the valve clearance, because all 4 spark plugs look the same. So if number 2, which is why I number them, if number 2 comes out and it looks like shit and the other 3 are good, well, that's a pretty telltale sign that there's a problem in that hole, and we're going to need to do a top end on it. But since they all look good, I mean, 120 is certainly a compression that the thing can run on. I don't think very well, and it might not be very smooth, but it'll run on it, which it obviously was. So basically, where do you go from there? You go right to your valve clearance. Now, it just so happens that it's really easy to do once you get all that crap out of the way, so we did that. So net sum. At this stage in the game, I'm not going to do any top end work on this engine. It runs too well, it doesn't smoke, and we got the compressions even. They're going to be within tolerance. I will look at the service manual, but I'm pretty sure 10% is a good number, because that's what I've seen in every service manual. A lot of times service manuals don't use a percentage, they use a PSI, pressure differential. So no more than, let's say, 10 PSI between, or sometimes like 15 or 16 PSI between cylinders. Well, if you use that number and you calculate out that a bike with 150 PSI base, where it's supposed to be, or at least where a couple of cylinders are at, and that would be your base then, is at 150. You multiply that times 10%, that's 15 PSI. So I always use 10%. That was way out of spec. Now we're way closer, so I'm not doing nothing to the top end. So the focus again is going to be transmission. I'm going to pull the motor, get this done. We'll film some of that as well. I don't know about pulling the motor apart, but certainly after I flip it over or when I start tearing it down, whatever positions it in, I don't know. I don't know. So we'll go ahead and get that taken apart, do some filming on that, and concentrate the filming on once I get the sump pan off. We can take a look at what the transmission carnage looks like. Okay, so I'm going to hang it up for this video. I hope you got something out of it. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to do the thumbs up, like the video, subscribe to the channel, ring the bell. You get notified when I put more videos up on this particular project. Watch for the next video and the following ones as well. And remember, guys, don't just repair, restore. Catch you on the next one.